June Halloran had been lying flat on the pier boards for close to 20 minutes, and the mud had soaked through her jacket a long time ago. 4 minutes. That was all she had left before the light she'd been waiting on all week went out for good. She had driven 2.5 hours down from Savannah to Marrowbone Key in the dark, climbed a fence she probably shouldn't have climbed, and picked this exact spot because of 3 dead pines leaning to the left. She needed them sitting right there. Out on the flats, the egrets still refused to move. "This pier is private property, ma'am." The guard was standing behind her, saying it for the second time. June didn't lift her eye from the viewfinder. "I've got 4 minutes of light." "Can you wait? I'm going to have to ask you to delete the card." "Then wait 4 minutes and ask me after." On the 3rd-floor balcony of the resort, a man stood watching with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hand. He'd been watching from the start. A woman lying in the mud for an angle nobody was likely paying her for, arguing with his own man, and not backing up an inch. He set the cup down and walked all the way out to the pier, not entirely sure what he meant to say. The egrets lifted. The shutter went 6 times in a row, and when June sat up, wiped her hands, and turned the screen around to check the frame, the man looked over her shoulder and went completely still. Marsh. First light. 3 pines leaning left. A band of light cutting the water exactly where it was supposed to cut it. He had looked at that same photograph every day for 9 years, on a piece of paper folded in 4 and kept in his wallet. Some people spend a lifetime searching for someone whose name they never learn. Cormac Vale had just found her, and she hadn't even turned around yet. If this story touched your heart, leave a like so I know you're still listening. Send it to someone you think might need to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe. I'll be back next week with another story just for you. The man said nothing for a long while, long enough that June had to turn all the way around to look at him. "That photograph," he said at last. "Where did you take it?" She looked down at the camera in her hand, then back at him, and understood the problem immediately. This was the kind of question people asked when they wanted to know exactly what had been captured, and from precisely where, so they would know which frame to make you delete. She had heard questions like that at a construction site outside Charleston, in a churchyard, and in 3 or 4 other places besides. She put the lens cap on, slipped the strap from around her neck, and tucked the camera into her bag. "I'll see myself out," she said. "You don't need to call anyone else." She picked up the bag and walked past him. He didn't stop her. He didn't follow her either. He simply remained where he was on the dock planks, and asked again, more slowly this time, as if he'd realized he'd spoken too quickly the first time. "I'm not asking because I want you to delete it. I'm asking because I want to know." June stopped. There was something in his voice she couldn't place. It wasn't the voice of a man giving an order, and it wasn't the voice of someone probing for information. It was closer to the voice of someone who had just seen something he didn't believe still existed. She turned back. "Here," she said, tipping her head toward the mudflat. "Right here. But what I came looking for isn't here anymore." He looked at her. "What did you come looking for? You just said you weren't asking so you could make me delete anything." "I answered you." She adjusted the strap of the bag on her shoulder. "The rest has nothing to do with your resort." He gave the faintest nod, and she had the feeling he'd filed that answer away somewhere, rather than simply letting it pass. "What's your name?" "Do I have to give my name before I'm allowed out the gate?" "No." "Then why are you asking?" "Because I want to know," he said, exactly as before. June studied him for another 2 seconds, then exhaled. "June Halloran," and he went silent. Not the silence of a man thinking about what to say next, the silence of someone who had just heard a name he'd never heard before, and still found himself frozen by it. It lasted exactly 2 seconds too long, and June noticed, because she'd made a living watching people in the moments when they couldn't control their faces. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No." He turned toward the security guard who was still standing there, with the expression of a man who had no idea what he was supposed to do. "Open the main gate for her. Don't make her go around." The guard said, "Yes, Mr. Vale," and June heard the Mr. in the sentence before the name itself fully registered. She looked at the man in front of her one more time, more carefully now, taking in the coat without a single wrinkle at 7 o'clock in the morning, the way both of the other men stood half a step behind him. "Who are you that you can order the people here around?" "The man who pays them." She nodded. "I see." Then she left. She didn't say thank you, and it wasn't until she reached the parking lot that she felt a little sorry about that. Sitting in her car, dried mud still clinging to her hands, she typed the 2 words, Vale and Marrowbone, into her phone. The first result appeared at the top of the screen, Vail Coastal. 9 resorts along the Georgia coast. A name on the list of the oldest family-owned companies in the state. And a boardroom portrait of the very man who had just told them to open the gate for her. June sat there staring at the screen for quite a while. She had just argued with one of his men, refused to erase her memory card right in front of him, and told him that her business had nothing to do with your resort. She shut off the phone, leaned her head back against the seat, and let out one short, dry laugh. "Nice work, June," she said to the roof of the car. On the dock, Cormac Vale was still standing exactly where she'd left him. He heard her engine start in the parking lot, heard the sound fade until it disappeared behind the line of trees, and only then did he take out his phone. Wallace answered on the first ring. "June Halloran," Cormac said. H-A-L-L. Photographer, freelance, based in Savannah. There was a brief silence on the other end. "Find everything you can, but don't let her know anyone is looking." Wallace asked what he wanted it for. It was the question he'd been asking for 20 years, and Cormac had always answered it. This time, he didn't. He only told him to do it, then ended the call. After that, he stood there a little longer beneath the fully risen sun, while the mudflat changed color, then opened his wallet. Inside, behind the cards, was a piece of paper folded into quarters, worn along all 4 edges, so thin that the creases were nearly torn through. He didn't unfold it. He simply held it in his left palm for a moment, the same hand marked by the scar, then closed the wallet and walked back toward the building. By the time June got back to Bull Street, it was nearly noon, and she had to park 2 blocks from the house because a paper delivery truck was always blocking the space in front of the print shop. She carried her camera bag back up the street, stopped at the mailbox at the foot of the stairs, and pulled out a stack of envelopes whose contents she already knew before opening them. 4 were from the hospital. 1 was from a debt collection company with a little leaf for a logo, something June had always found funny in a way that made it impossible to laugh. She tucked the whole stack under her arm and started climbing. There were 19 steps up to the apartment. She had been climbing them for 4 years, and on the 12th step, her foot missed. She caught the railing in time, but the letters scattered down the stairs. "You okay?" Tate called from the kitchen. "My legs are tired," June said. "Been driving since 5 o'clock this morning." She stood still on the stairs for a few more seconds, not because of her legs, then turned back to pick up the mail. In the kitchen, Tate was reheating the food from the night before. His wheelchair pushed close to the induction cooktop, one hand gripping the wheel rim to keep the chair from rolling while the other stirred. For 2 years now, he had insisted on doing this part himself, and June had stopped arguing. "Get anything good?" he asked without turning around. "White herons. 6 frames. 2 came out right. 2 is a lot." "Yeah." She set the stack of letters face down on the table, and Tate caught a glimpse of them. He said nothing. That had been the unspoken agreement between the 2 of them for the past 2 years, that each was allowed to pretend a little, as long as neither pretended too much. After they ate, June went into the dark room. Calling it a dark room made it sound grander than it was. In truth, it was an old bathroom, whose window she had covered with cardboard and black tape when they first moved in. She developed the roll of film she'd shot that morning, hung it on the line, waited for it to dry, then turned on the light to examine the first frame. The 3 pine trees leaning to the left were exactly where they were supposed to be. The band of light crossing the water was exactly where it should have been. She held the film up in front of her face and couldn't see it clearly, so she brought it closer, then closer still. By the time she stopped, the film was only about a handspan from her eyes, which was at least 4 inches closer than it had been back in June, and June knew the exact distance because she had measured it herself. She lowered her hand. She slipped the film into a sleeve, put the sleeve in a drawer, and turned off the light. She sat in the darkness longer than she needed to. Out on the table was the appointment notice for a follow-up visit she had already postponed twice and would postpone a 3rd time because the last appointment had cost as much as 3 weddings, and she'd only photographed 1. That evening, she started cleaning out the storage room. She had been thinking about doing it for a month and kept putting it off. But the number at the bottom of the paper with the leaf logo was larger than the number she'd seen in the spring, and June understood that she couldn't keep delaying anymore. She pulled out her old tripod, 2 lenses she hadn't used in a long time, and an older film camera that still worked perfectly well. She laid them out on the floor, photographed each one so she could list them for sale, and tried not to think about how many weddings she'd had to photograph to afford each of them. In the farthest corner of the storage room, Beneath 2 stacks of cardboard boxes was the wooden toolbox that had belonged to her father. It had been sitting there for 9 years. June hadn't opened it once since the funeral, and she couldn't even remember why she'd kept it, because there was nothing inside worth any money. She sat down on the floor, pulled it toward her, and opened the lid. Inside was exactly what she expected. A plastic point-and-shoot camera he'd bought at a thrift store, a flashlight, several coils of wire, a few photographs of the diner from when it had first opened, yellowed at the corners. And at the very bottom, rolling loose in a small compartment, was an undeveloped roll of film still sealed inside its plastic canister, with a strip of masking tape stuck to it in her father's handwriting. 9/4. June picked it up. Her father had always dated film that way. Day 1st, month 2nd. The opposite order from everyone else, and he would argue to the bitter end that his way was the correct one. September 4th. She sat very still for a long time with the roll of film resting in her palm. Then something surfaced in her mind, something she hadn't thought about in years and had never considered important. During the last week of his life, he had stood at the back door of the diner, wiping a skillet, and told her that lately there had been cars parked out there around midnight, cars that parked but never came inside, their lights off while someone sat inside them. June had been 18 then, preoccupied with other things, and she'd only told him to make sure he locked the back door. He had said he would. She set the roll of film on the windowsill, meaning to leave it there and deal with it tomorrow. Then she changed her mind, picked it up, and slipped it into the pocket of her coat. 3 days later, June was sitting in the print shop on the ground floor, bargaining with the owner over the cost of making a proof set of photographs she wasn't even sure she could sell to anyone, when the bell over the glass door rang. She looked up, and it took her about 2 seconds to understand that the man who had just walked in wasn't there to order wedding prints. Cormac Vale stood in the doorway alone, carrying nothing but a folder clipped around a stack of papers. No flowers, no gift basket, no one accompanying him. The shop owner glanced at him, then at June, and June said, "You can go on and back. I'll talk to him for a minute." "You're harder to find than I expected," Cormac said. "I've been right here for 4 years. Your website doesn't list an address. Because I don't want people knocking on the door at 10 o'clock at night asking about wedding pictures." She wiped her hands on the towel hanging beside the machine. "But I assume you didn't come here to print photographs." He placed the folder on the glass counter and slid it toward her. 9 properties, 8 weeks, all new photography, print, and online. Our previous photographer left last month. June looked at the folder but didn't touch it. She had known this was coming, or something like it, from the moment she realized who the man she'd argued with on the dock really was. Things usually happened in the same pattern. People saw you crawling through mud at 7 o'clock in the morning. They saw the car you drove. They found out you owed somebody more money than you could pay, and then they brought you something that looked like work, but was really loose change fallen from their pocket, wrapped up politely. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Do what?" "I was a little out of line with your people that day. You already let me leave through the main gate. Call it even." She pushed the folder back toward him. "I don't take jobs like this." Cormac didn't push it back. He left the folder exactly where it was, in the middle of the counter, at the same distance between them. "You think I pity you. I think you're a kind man in a very expensive way." She said it without looking at him because she was busy straightening the stack of mounting boards on the counter. "And I can't afford to accept your kindness." He was silent for exactly as long as an ordinary person might need to feel insulted. Then he spoke, his voice as measured as it had been on the dock. "The night you left the property, I sat down and looked through every photograph you have posted publicly, from beginning to end. 6 years of work." June looked up. "You have a series shot in the kitchen of a restaurant in Brunswick. 32 photographs. Not one of them shows the food. They hired me to photograph the food." "I know. Which is why I assumed they didn't use that series." "They didn't. Because you photographed the head cook's hands," he continued without emphasizing a single word. "You have another series shot in a hotel corridor at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's no one in the frame, and the person looking at it still knows someone has just walked through. You haven't pressed the shutter once without a reason, and I've seen enough of your work to say that without worrying I'm wrong." He tapped one finger lightly against the folder. "That's what I'm paying for. Not your circumstances." "I don't know your circumstances, and I haven't asked." June looked at him for a long time. She made a living reading people's faces, and his face held none of what she usually saw in men who came in wearing generosity like a favor, that faint expectation of gratitude already waiting there. He was simply waiting for her answer. She pulled the folder toward herself, turned to the page with the terms, read through it, then stopped at the section dealing with image usage rights. "One condition," she said. "Go ahead. I decide which photographs get used and which ones don't. Not your marketing department, not you. I deliver the final selection, and you use only what's in it. That's it." She looked up at him. "This isn't negotiable." "All right." June paused. She had already prepared 3 lines for the argument that was supposed to come next, and now she had no use for any of them. "You're not going to push back? You just said it wasn't negotiable. People still negotiate after someone says that." "I don't," he said. And that was the part that unsettled her. Not that he had agreed, but that he had agreed too quickly, with the speed of a man who had already decided that the real price of this arrangement lay somewhere else, not in the photographs. June thought about that for nearly a minute. Then she thought about the mailbox at the bottom of the stairs, about the number on the final line, about the follow-up appointment notice she'd already postponed twice, and about Tate upstairs reheating the same pot of food from the night before, for the 3rd meal in a row. She picked up the pen. 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks. She signed, and when she looked up, she saw that he wasn't looking at her signature. He was looking at her hand. On Monday morning, a black car pulled up in front of the print shop at 10 minutes to 6, and the man who got out to open the rear door for her was silver-haired, somewhere in his 60s, wearing an old coat and shoes worn down at the toes. He introduced himself as Wallace Pruitt, and told her he would be driving her back and forth for the next 8 weeks. June told him she had her own car. He said he knew, but he was still being paid to drive her, so if she drove herself, he would have to follow behind her anyway, which would burn twice the gas and benefit no one. She laughed and got into the car. The drive out to Isle of Hope took 40 minutes, most of it in silence, and June noticed that he had a habit of looking at her in the rearview mirror. Not the kind of look that made a person uncomfortable, more like the look of someone deciding whether or not to say something aloud. It wasn't until the car turned onto the final road that he spoke. "Do you know who you're working for?" June looked up and met his eyes in the mirror. "A man who pays on time." Wallace nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "He always pays on time." Then he said nothing more, and June spent the rest of the drive thinking about the way he had emphasized the word always. The house stood at the end of a road lined on both sides with trees draped in moss, and 2 men were standing outside the gate. June noticed them the moment the car began to slow. And she noticed because 4 years of freelance photography had taught her that people who were waiting always did something while they waited. They smoked. They made small talk. They looked down at their phones, looked up again, then looked back down. These 2 men did none of that. They simply stood there, watching the road. 4 hours later, when June went out to the car to get another light stand, they were still standing in exactly the same place, still doing nothing at all. The shoot took place in the library, a long room with windows overlooking the river, and Cormac sat wherever she told him to sit without asking a single question. He was the worst kind of subject June had ever photographed, not because he was stiff, but because he was the opposite, because he sat too perfectly still in the way of a man who had learned a very long time ago how not to reveal anything at all. She took 20 frames and discarded all 20. "Put both hands on the table for me," she said. "The light is dying there." He did as she asked. And when his left hand opened against the wood, June saw it. A scar ran along his palm, from near the wrist to the base of his index finger, thin and white and old. She had photographed enough hands to know which scars came from work and which ones didn't. She lowered the camera. "What happened there?" He didn't pull his hand away, and he didn't look down at it. He looked at her. "One night, I didn't run fast enough." June waited. When people said something like that, they usually followed it with another sentence, something to soften it, something that turned it into an old story. He said nothing else. She raised the camera and pressed the shutter, and it was the first frame from that morning she decided to keep. She stayed until evening because the late afternoon light on the porch was something she didn't want to miss, and they arranged a room for her in the east wing. Around midnight, she went downstairs to the kitchen for some water. The outer porch door was slightly open, and she saw him standing outside with his back to her, a phone held to his ear. He listened for a long time without speaking. Then he said exactly 3 words. "Bring them home." Then he ended the call. No goodbye, no further instructions, nothing after that. June stood motionless in the dark kitchen with the glass of water in her hand, and realized she was holding her breath. Though she couldn't understand why 3 ordinary words had made her do it, she thought it must have been his voice. There was nothing in it at all. No anger, no impatience, not even exhaustion. Just a sentence laid down because it needed to be said. She slipped back inside before he turned around, went upstairs to her room, and sat on the edge of the bed for a while. A man who owned 9 resorts along the coast had warehouses, boats, shipments, hundreds of employees working night shifts, she reminded herself. Bring them home could mean anything. It could be a shuttle bus broken down on the road. It could be a group of third-shift workers whose hours were over. She set the glass of water on the table, turned off the light, and lay down. Before she fell asleep, she thought about his left hand resting on the wood, and about the way he had said those words without once looking down at it, as though it wasn't a scar at all, but a name he had stopped saying a long time ago. 8 weeks passed the way time always passes when people are too busy to count it. Tybee first, then St. Simons, then Brunswick, then an old hotel in Charleston that Vail Coastal had just bought, and hadn't had time to renovate yet. June got up at 4:30 nearly every morning, because the light she needed came only once and waited for no one. She photographed dining rooms at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the chairs were still upside down on the tables and no one had walked in yet, because she wanted to see the room before it had to perform. She photographed kitchens in the middle of a shift, standing tucked into a corner for 40 minutes, until everyone forgot she was there, and only then did she press the shutter. She photographed hallways at midnight, when nothing remained but the low wall lights and a service cart someone had forgotten. Wallace drove her everywhere, and he began automatically stopping at the roadside coffee shop she liked, without asking, simply pulling in. Cormac was present for most of the shoots, not to keep an eye on her. He had his own work, phone calls that ran long, and that he always stepped outside to take. People who came to see him for 15 minutes and then left. But he was there, and he asked questions that showed he was paying attention. He asked why she always photographed windows from the inside looking out, and never the other way around. He asked why, out of 300 frames at Tybee, only 4 had people in them. She told him that if a person appeared in a photograph, there had to be a reason for them to be there, not simply to prove the place had guests. He nodded and never asked about it again. It happened in Brunswick, during the 5th week. June delivered a final selection of 28 frames, and the marketing department sent back a list of requested changes, and Cormac sided with them. He wanted the set brighter. He wanted to remove 3 frames of the passage behind the kitchen, and the frame of a server leaning against the doorway at the end of his shift. They argued about it in the 3rd-floor fire stairwell because it was the only place no one kept walking through, and they argued for 20 straight minutes. People book rooms because they want to see somewhere worth going, he said. People book rooms because they want to believe the place is real, she said. You brighten it up and it turns into advertising photography. And everyone knows advertising photography is advertising photography, even the people who believe it. The frame with the server leaning against the doorway makes him look exhausted. He was exhausted. He'd just worked 9 hours. And you want me to put that on the homepage. I want you to put it on the 4th page, where you talk about the staff. And I want you to put it there, because it's the only photograph in the entire set that will make someone stop. She lowered her voice. You have 9 properties. Every one of them has a blue pool and towels folded into swans. You're not going to beat anyone with that. What you have that other people don't is 4 o'clock in the morning in Brunswick. He went silent. June was already prepared for what came next. The part where the man paying the bill would tell her that he understood her point of view, but ultimately this was his brand, delivered in a voice that was very polite and very final. She had heard that sentence so many times she could have recited it from memory. Cormac didn't say it. He said, You're right. June blinked. Keep the 3 frames of the back passage. Put the server on the 4th page. He opened the stairwell door. I'll talk to marketing. Then he left. She remained in the stairwell for a while longer with the camera in her hand and the strange feeling of someone who had pushed with all her strength against a door only to have it swing open on its own. She had argued with plenty of men in this business. Some of them lost and remembered it forever. Some gave in and then found a way to change things again when the photographs went to print. Some agreed on the spot, and 2 weeks later she discovered they had used a different version anyway. No one had ever told her you're right without adding a frown, an exhale, or a joke meant to recover a little pride. That evening in Charleston, she sat on the back steps of the hotel with a cup of cold coffee and thought about it longer than she wanted to admit. Then she thought about how she had been counting down the 8 weeks from the very first day, and now only 3 remained, and she didn't like the feeling that came with that number at all. In the 6th week, they went back to St. Simon's to reshoot several frames that hadn't come out right, and because his flight had been moved to the following morning, the two of them stayed on the porch that night. June spread the photographs across the table to make her selections, while he sat opposite her with a glass of wine he hadn't even finished halfway. Close to 11 o'clock, she slid out a frame of the dock at the property taken at dusk and asked if he wanted to keep it. He picked it up, studied it longer than necessary, then set it back down. "Keep it," he said, "but don't print it large." "Why?" "Because I don't like docks." He said it so calmly that June almost let it pass. She didn't. She put down the stack of photographs and leaned back in her chair. And she didn't ask anything, because she had learned a long time ago that silence could ask better questions than words. He turned the wineglass slowly in his hand for about a minute. Then he spoke. "My father went down to dock number 7 at 11 o'clock one night and never came back up." June didn't move. 9 years ago, August, he was still looking out into the darkness beyond the porch, toward the place that was water and daylight. "I was there. I was standing about 40 yards from where he was, higher up, near the old warehouse. I could see him the entire time. Then I couldn't." "Was there anything you could do?" "No," he said the word cleanly, without drawing it out. "I ran down. I took the outside stairs, and those stairs are long, and by the time I got there, it was already over." He lifted the glass, then set it down again without drinking. "I was 25 years old. I'd never had to do anything bigger than sign papers he put in front of me. The next morning I sat at his desk, and 14 people were standing there waiting for me to say something." "What did you say?" "I said we'd work as usual." He gave the slightest shrug. "It was the only thing I could think of. And it turned out to be true, in the worst possible sense. We worked as usual. For 9 years, there hasn't been a single day that wasn't usual." June looked at him. He told the story in the voice of someone who had told it to himself several thousand times, rearranging every sentence until it was neat, sanding down every sharp edge, so that each time he took it out again, it could no longer cut his hands. She had heard that kind of telling at funerals, in hospital waiting rooms, and coming from her own mouth. "Do you actually feel it?" she asked. "Or do you just manage it?" He turned toward her. "Is there a difference?" "Yes." She held his gaze. "What you manage never heals. It only stays quiet." He didn't answer. June could hear the insects outside and the wind moving through the curtain behind her, and she counted at least 15 seconds before he did anything at all. Then he set the glass down on the table. Not hard. He simply set it down and took his hand away from it. "There's something I've never told anyone," he said. "It's not a big thing. That's all right. That night, I had 30 seconds, he said. "From the moment I realized something was wrong to the moment I started running. For 30 seconds, I stood exactly where I was. I wasn't afraid. I remember very clearly that I wasn't afraid. I was calculating what would happen if I went down there, what would happen if I didn't, and which choice would be better for the people standing behind me." He paused. "I calculated. For those 30 seconds, I stood there calculating, the way you'd calculate a contract." June said nothing. "Then I ran, but I'd already spent those 30 seconds. He lifted his left hand onto the table, opened it, and this time he looked down at it. "You asked whether I feel anything. I don't know. I know that for 9 years I haven't stopped calculating. I calculate everything. I calculate people. I calculate time. I even calculate the things that should never be calculated." He closed his hand. "If that's feeling, then I have it. If it isn't, then I don't have anything at all." June sat still. She wanted to tell him that 30 seconds wouldn't have saved anyone, that those stairs were long and he knew they were long, that people don't freeze because they're cold-hearted, but because, for one moment, the human mind refuses to believe what is happening right in front of it. She knew all 3 things were true. She also knew none of them would help him, because he had already told himself every one of them, and still didn't believe them, so she said nothing. She simply reached across the table, slid the photograph of the dock out of the stack, and turned it face down. "This one goes," she said. He looked at the photograph lying face down on the table for a long time. "All right," he said. In the 7th week, Cormac asked her to stay for dinner at Isle of Hope because someone wanted to see the photographs before they were finalized. June assumed it was someone from marketing, The man who walked in at 7 o'clock was around 50, his hair neatly combed, carrying a bottle of wine that he handed to Wallace as though the two of them had known each other for 30 years, and perhaps they really had. He shook June's hand before Cormac even had a chance to introduce him. "Desmond Fay," he said. "I've been advising this family since before he knew how to tie a necktie." He laughed, and his laugh was warm, genuinely warm, the kind that made the person across from him lower their shoulders without realizing it. Dinner was more pleasant than June had expected. Fay looked through the entire Brunswick set, stopped at the frame of the server leaning against the doorway, tapped a finger on it, and said it was the only photograph in the whole series that made him want to know the name of the person in it. June told him she hadn't asked the man's name. Fay said that made it even more right. He asked how long she'd been doing this work, where she'd studied, whether she ever planned to open a gallery, and he listened to her answers instead of merely waiting for his turn to speak. Halfway through dinner, he set down his fork and asked how her younger brother was doing these days. June paused for half a beat. "Tate," Fay said, as if helping her along. "He's 21 now, isn't he? You know my brother?" "I know his name. Anyone who works with Mr. Vale in this house, I know the names of their family members. Don't take it personally. It's just an old man's professional habit." He smiled. "I'm better with names than faces." "He's doing well?" "He's fine." "Good." He poured more wine for Cormac, but none for himself. "Did you grow up in Savannah?" "Outside Savannah, south of the city." "South where?" "I've driven that road all my life, along Highway 17. "Ah." Fay nodded thoughtfully. "Which stretch? Above or below the turnoff for Midway?" June lifted her water glass and took a sip. "Below. About 4 miles. So near where that old gas station used to be." "That gas station closed a long time ago." "What year was that again?" "I don't remember." "What did your family do out there?" Fay asked, his voice still light, as though he were asking whether she preferred coffee or tea. "My father ran a diner." "An all-night place?" "Open all night. I remember now." He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly like a man searching through an old memory, and the expression was so natural that no one in the room would have found anything strange about it. There was an all-night diner along that stretch. Long-haul drivers used to stop there. "What was your father's name?" "Patrick Halloran." "Halloran," Fay said. "That's right." He raised his glass. "Was the food good?" "It was. I'm sure it was. Those places are always better than restaurants." He took a sip. "Does he still run it?" "My father died," June said, 9 years ago." "I'm sorry." He set down his glass, and his face became exactly the face of a man who had accidentally said the wrong thing, perfect in every detail. "I ask too many questions." "It's all right. That's what happens when you get old. You start asking whatever comes into your head." He turned toward Cormac. "See? I keep telling you I need to learn to ask fewer questions." Cormac didn't laugh with him. He was holding his wineglass in his right hand. He hadn't taken a single sip for some time, and his eyes were still fixed on Fay's face. June didn't notice, because she was too busy trying to dismiss the cold little sensation that had just moved across the back of her neck, a feeling for which she could find no reason. She told herself it was probably because someone had mentioned her father. People still brought up her father from time to time, and she still felt that way whenever they did. At the end of dinner, Fay was the first to stand, saying he still had to drive back to Brunswick that night. He shook Cormac's hand, gave him a pat on the shoulder, then turned to June and held out his hand. She gave him hers. His grip was warm and firm, and he kept holding it. "It was very good to meet you, June," he said. "Yes, you do excellent work. I mean that. I'm not just being polite." "Thank you." He still hadn't released her hand. It lasted only about 2 seconds longer than normal, no more than that. But June made her living counting moments, and she counted those 2 seconds. Then he let go, smiled, and headed for the door. Wallace walked him out to his car. After the sound of the engine had faded away, June bent down to gather the stack of photographs from the table and remarked casually that he seemed very pleasant. Cormac didn't answer. She looked up. He was still staring toward the door, and he was still holding the untouched glass of wine in his hand. Cormac drove her home himself that night because Wallace had gone to Brunswick. They left Isle of Hope, circled south to avoid the roadwork, and when a sign appeared for Highway 17, June sat up straighter. She looked out the window, counted several light poles, then told him to stop. He pulled onto the shoulder without asking why. She got out first. On the left side of the road was an empty lot, and in the headlights he had left on, a square slab of concrete could still be seen in the middle of weeds that had grown knee-high. At one corner, a water pipe stuck up about 2 handspans from the ground. Nothing else remained. June stepped onto the concrete foundation, took a few short steps, then stopped at a place whose meaning only she knew. Cormac got out of the car and stood at the edge of the road. "My father's diner," she said. He didn't answer. He kept it open all night. Not because there were that many customers. Some nights there were only 4 people. But he used to say that if you hung a sign saying you were open all night, then you had to stay open all night. Otherwise, what was the point of hanging the sign? She looked down at her feet. "That pipe over there is where the sink used to be. The kitchen was behind you. The entrance was exactly where you're standing. So technically you're standing out in the road." He looked down at his feet, then back at her, but he didn't move. "He taught me how to take pictures," June continued. "Not properly. He didn't know enough to teach anyone properly. He bought a plastic camera at a thrift store and photographed everything. His pictures were terrible. Every single one was crooked. But he had one thing he always said, and he said it so often I got sick of hearing it." She smiled faintly. "He said the best light of the day lasts exactly 11 minutes. Not 10, not 15. 11. He said it starts before the sun comes up and ends just after it clears the horizon. And if you're still lying in bed, you've missed it. And once you've missed it, you have to wait until the next day." "How did he measure it?" "With the kitchen timer," June said. "The one he used for boiling eggs. He'd set it for 11 minutes, put it on the windowsill, and tell me to go out there and take pictures. When it rang, I was supposed to come back in for breakfast." She fell silent for a while. Wind moved in from behind the property, carrying the salty smell of marsh mud, a smell June had breathed through the first 18 years of her life, and now only encountered when she came back here. "There's marshland behind this place," she said. "About a 15-minute walk, and you reach the water. There wasn't a road back then. You had to wade through. I went out there every morning for years." She turned to look at him. "That picture you saw the first day. The one on my camera. I didn't take it for the first time that morning. I was taking it again. I shot the original 9 years ago, in that exact place, on September 4th. I remember the date because I wrote it on the back. Cormac didn't move. The other day, when I went down to Marrowbone, I was trying to photograph it again," June said. "Same place, same time, same 3 trees. I wanted to see what had changed after 9 years. She gave a small shrug. "Turns out the 3 trees are still exactly the same. Everything behind them is different. Back then there was nothing behind them. Now your resort is there." She said it without meaning anything by it. She said it in the casual tone people used when pointing out some small irony, the kind that made you think life was strange sometimes. "When did you buy that place?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "I didn't buy it," he said. "My father did." "Oh, before." June nodded and didn't ask anything else. She bent down, brushed aside some weeds at the edge of the concrete slab, then stood and dusted off her hands. "Come on. It's late." She walked back toward the car. Cormac remained where he was for several more seconds. He looked at the empty lot, at the water pipe, then beyond it, toward the smell of salt mud drifting in from the marsh, the same smell he had breathed every morning for the past 4 years, whenever he stepped onto the 3rd-floor balcony at Marrowbone Quay. He stood there until June tapped lightly on the roof of the car and asked if he was all right. "Yes," he said. He got into the car. He started the engine, turned around, and continued toward Savannah. June turned on the radio, then turned it off again, yawned, and rested her head against the window. They had been driving for about 10 minutes before she realized he hadn't said a word. She glanced over. Both of his hands were on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his jaw perfectly still. She waited a little longer, then let it go. For the remaining 40 minutes, he didn't say a single word. He reached Isle of Hope close to 1 o'clock in the morning and didn't go upstairs to his room. Instead, he went down to the basement, where 2 rows of steel filing cabinets stood, installed by his father back in the days before anyone used computers. Cabinets Cormac had never gotten rid of. He switched on the light and began searching. Vale Coastal kept its land records by parcel, 1 folder for each tract, and every folder had an index on the first page that some secretary had typed up years ago. He searched the southern strip of land. He went through boundary maps, survey reports, transfer documents bearing his father's signature, slanting to the right in exactly the same way Cormac's signature did now. Close to 3 o'clock in the morning, he found the thinnest folder in the entire drawer. There were 4 sheets inside. The first was a copy of a certificate from the county fire department, listing the date, the time, and the address by highway marker instead of street number. The second was a typed scene report, less than a page long, with its conclusion on the final line. Damage to the electrical wiring system in the kitchen area. No evidence of criminal involvement. The third sheet was an inventory of property. The fourth was an independent inspection form, and this was the one Cormac held the longest. It contained 3 lines of text and a signature. He knew that signature. It wasn't a vague recognition, not something that merely looked familiar. He knew it because during the first 4 years after taking his father's chair, he had reviewed the payroll every month, and that name had appeared on the 11th line under outside technical services, a fixed amount paid regularly to a man Cormac had never once met. He had cut the payment in his 5th year because no one could explain what the man actually did. No one had objected. Cormac placed the paper on top of the cabinet and looked at the lower right corner, where the signing date was written. He stared at it for a long time. Then he reached for the first sheet, placed the 2 papers side by side, and compared the dates. The fire had happened that night. The inspection form had been signed 22 days later. That wasn't the problem. An inspection delayed by 3 weeks was perfectly ordinary. Sometimes it took even longer. The problem was somewhere else, and it took him another moment to see it, because seeing it required remembering a third date that wasn't written anywhere in the folder. His father had gone down to dock number 7 on a night in August. This inspection had been signed exactly 22 days after that night. The same distance, the same number. Cormac sat down in the only chair in the room and didn't move for several minutes. Then he took out his phone and called Wallace. It rang 4 times. Wallace's voice was rough from being woken up. "Mr. Vale, where are you?" "Brunswick. I'll be back tomorrow morning." Cormac looked down at the 2 papers lying side by side on top of the cabinet. "That fall," he said. "After the night at the dock, who sent people down to Highway 17? There was no sound from the other end. It wasn't the silence of a man thinking. Cormac had listened to Wallace think thousands of times over the past 20 years, and it had its own sounds. The breath leaving through his nose, the scrape of a chair shifting. This time there was nothing at all. It lasted long enough for Cormac to hear the ceiling fan turning on the other end of the line. "Wallace, I'm listening. I asked who sent people down to Highway 17. Another stretch of silence followed. Then Wallace spoke, his voice slow and fully awake now, no longer rough. "Are you sure you want to know?" Cormac didn't answer that question. He stood up, picked up the folder, and switched off the basement light with his other hand. "Come straight here tomorrow morning," he said. "Don't stop anywhere else. And don't tell anyone I asked. I understand." "Wallace, yes. In 20 years you've never once asked me that question back." On the other end of the line, the old man was silent for one more beat. "No," he said, "I never have." The final shoot of the 7th week took place at Tybee, on the wooden walkway running along the edge of the dunes, and June had deliberately chosen noon because this time she needed hard sunlight, not soft light. She stood on the raised section of the boardwalk, resting one hip against the railing, looking down toward the beach. She took 4 frames. She lowered the camera to check them, and when she looked back up toward the ocean, there was a gray patch directly in the center of her vision. It wasn't completely dark. It was more like someone had pressed a piece of frosted paper over the exact place she was looking, while everything around the edges remained visible. The sand was still bright, the blue and red umbrellas in the distance were still there, but whatever she looked directly at disappeared. She blinked. She closed her eyes completely for 5 seconds, then opened them again. The gray patch was still in exactly the same place. June didn't call out. She raised both hands and gripped the wooden railing, holding on tightly, and stood perfectly still. She understood that if she took a step, she wouldn't know where that step was going to land, and on this walkway there was a step every 10 feet or so, and she couldn't remember how far away the nearest one was, so she didn't move. She stood there with both hands wrapped around the railing, the camera hanging from her neck, listening to her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She counted. She had taught herself to do that back in the spring, count to 60, and then start over again, because once it had passed after 40 seconds, and another time it had lasted 4 minutes, and no 2 episodes were ever the same. She reached 23 when a hand came to rest on her elbow. June. She didn't turn her head because turning wouldn't help. You're on my left? On your left. All right. She let out a breath. Just stay there. Cormac didn't ask anything. He simply stood beside her, holding her elbow, and he didn't try to pull her anywhere. After about a minute, the gray patch began to fade around the edges, then grew thinner, then dissolved like mist on glass. The sand came back. The umbrellas came back. June could see his hand on the sleeve of her shirt, and she could see the white scar running along the palm of his other hand, hanging loose at his side. It's gone, she said. She let go of the railing, turned, and managed 3 steps on her own until she reached the level section. Too much sun, she said. I've been looking into the glare. It happens sometimes. He looked at her. He looked a little too long, and June knew exactly what that look meant because she gave people the same look when she didn't believe what they had just told her. Yeah, he said. He didn't ask another question. He didn't mention it again during the remaining 2 hours of the shoot. Didn't suggest that she take a break. Didn't ask whether she needed water. Didn't do anything that would force her to explain herself. But at the end of the shoot, when she folded up the light stand, he picked up the lens case and carried it for her, and he did it so naturally that anyone might have thought he'd been carrying it for the past 7 weeks, even though he never had before. That evening, Wallace drove her back to Bull Street. Tate was watching a game and asked how the day had gone. June said it had been normal, then went into the darkroom. She closed the door behind her. She stood there for a long time without turning on the light. She didn't need to. She knew that room down to every inch. She knew the 3rd clip on the drying line was loose, knew the developing tray had a chip along its left edge, knew exactly where one floor tile rose slightly above the others. She stood in the darkness and thought, very calmly, that if what had happened at noon had lasted not 1 minute but an hour, she still would have been able to stand inside this room because this was a room she didn't need to see. Then she thought about the boardwalk at Tybee, about standing there gripping the railing because she was afraid to take a single step, and she understood that outside this 9-square-foot room, the entire rest of the world was a place she needed to see. She sat down on the tile floor with her back against the door. Out on the table, beneath the stack of letters, the follow-up appointment notice she had already postponed twice was still lying exactly where she'd left it. She sat in the darkness for about half an hour. Then she stood up, switched on the red light, and finished developing the roll of film from that day, because there was still 1 week left before the 8 weeks were over, and she had promised to deliver everything. The paper fell out of her coat pocket when she got out of the car on Bull Street, and Wallace didn't notice it until the next morning when he was wiping down the back seat. It was folded into quarters, about the size of a hand, printed with the name of a clinic in Savannah, and the name of a doctor followed by the words retinal specialist. There were 3 appointment dates on it. The first 2 had been crossed out in ballpoint pen. The 3rd was blank. Wallace sat quietly in the car for a while. He was a man who had kept more things secret than he cared to remember, and he knew very well where the line lay between keeping something private and simply standing by while something happened. Then he folded the paper again and carried it into the house. Cormac didn't ask where he'd gotten it. He only read it twice, then set it on the table and looked at it for a while longer. He thought about that afternoon at Tybee, about both of her hands gripping the railing, about her saying the sun was too strong. She'd been looking into the glare. 40 minutes later, he called someone in Miami he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. By that afternoon, everything was arranged. A name, a department, an appointment within 9 days, a private room, accommodations for the family member traveling with her, and expenses that didn't need to be discussed. He took the sheet of paper where he'd written all of it down and went to Bull Street on Thursday evening. June was laying photographs across the table to make the final selection. She looked up, saw him, and told him not to worry. It would all be finished next week. He said nothing about the photographs. He placed 2 sheets of paper on the table, her follow-up appointment notice underneath, and his notes on top. Wallace found this in the car, he said. June looked down. She didn't blush, didn't deny anything, didn't try to turn it into a joke. She simply looked at the 2 sheets of paper and set down the stack of photographs in her hands. Miami, Cormac said. Next Wednesday. The person I spoke to is the head of the department, not the doctor on call, the department head. Tate's accommodations are arranged, and there's transportation, because I assumed he'd want to go with you. He paused. You won't have to pay anything. June sat very still. You already called? It's done, before asking me. Yes. She nodded slowly. She reached for his sheet of paper, read it from top to bottom, read it carefully, all the way through the lines with the room number and appointment time. Then she set it down and pushed it back toward him. "No," she said. He didn't move. "June, you know why I've postponed it twice, don't you? You know I don't have the money. You know I'm selling some of my equipment too." Wallace probably saw the boxes downstairs. She wasn't speaking harshly. She spoke as though she were reading back a list. "You know all of it. And you still called before asking me. Because if I'd asked first, you would have said no." "That's right. And I'm still saying no." "What exactly are you saying no to?" "Owing you this." She pointed to her eyes. "If you buy my site for me, then from now on everything I see belongs to you. Every photograph I take for the rest of my life, you'll be standing behind it. Every time I press the shutter, I'll know who made it possible." "I don't think of it that way." "You don't think of it that way." June looked straight at him. "But that's still what you're doing." The room went quiet. Outside, the paper delivery truck started its engine and pulled away. "Do you remember what you said the day we signed the contract?" she asked. "You said you were paying for the way I see, not for my circumstances. And you said you didn't know my circumstances, and you weren't asking. I signed because of that." She pushed the paper a little farther toward him. "The moment you pay for this, I become my circumstances." Cormac looked at the paper lying on the table between them. He didn't pick it up. He also didn't say any of the things June had prepared herself to answer. Didn't tell her she was being stubborn. Didn't say this was about her health and not her pride. Didn't tell her to think about Tate. He had all 3 sentences ready, and he used none of them. He stood there and understood, slowly and clearly, that in 9 years no one had ever told him not to do something after he had already done it. People thanked him. People accepted. People accepted and went home and told someone about it. No one had ever pushed it back toward him and explained why. "All right," he said. June looked up. "All right, I'll cancel it." He picked up his sheet of paper, folded it, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. Then he pointed to the other sheet, still lying on the table, hers, the one with the 3rd appointment left blank. "You keep that one. I know. I won't ask again," he said, "but I hope you fill it in." Then he walked toward the door, and at the threshold he stopped. "Thank you for saying it," he said. "No one ever has." She came on a Tuesday morning, 2 days before the contract ended, and she came alone. There was no car waiting outside, no one accompanying her, only a woman in her 60s who stepped into the print shop, looked around very slowly, then stopped where June was standing. "You're Halloran." "Yes, Odette Vale." She didn't hold out her hand. She walked to the counter, set her handbag on the glass, and removed the glove from her right hand while leaving the left one on. "May I sit?" June pulled out the stool. Odette didn't sit. "I've seen the photographs," Odette said. "The Brunswick set. My son showed them to me last week. He showed them off like a schoolboy showing off a perfect score." She said the words showed them off gently, almost affectionately. "You're quite good. Thank you. I mean it. I'm not saying it to be pleasant. I'm old now. I don't have time to say things just to be pleasant." Her eyes moved around the shop once more, taking in the old printer, the wooden staircase leading upstairs, the stack of cardboard boxes in the corner that June hadn't gotten around to taking away yet. "You live up there?" "Yes." "With your younger brother?" "Yes." "Good." She nodded. Someone who knows how to look after a younger sibling is always worth something. She said it so warmly that it took June several seconds to realize that the woman had just told her she knew everything about her. "Did you want something printed?" June asked. Odette smiled faintly. "You know why I'm here." "I can guess." "Then I'll keep it brief." She placed her gloved hand on the glass counter. "My son is 34 years old, and in 9 years he has never canceled an appointment in Miami for anyone. This week, he canceled one." June said nothing. "I don't blame you," Odette said. "You have something men like him almost never encounter. You're not afraid of him. You even argue with him. And worse, you're right when you do. That's the dangerous part." She looked June over from head to toe without hurrying. "And you're beautiful. Beautiful in the way people photograph once, and then move on. You understand what I mean?" "I do. They take one photograph, hang it on the wall, then 3 years later, they replace it with another." She said it as lightly as if she were commenting on the weather. "I married at 23. I thought I was the only one too. I sat in that chair for 40 years, And I learned that in our family, the most expensive thing isn't affection, it's peace. If you come into it, that peace is over. She opened her handbag. His father built that house because no one standing beside him had anything another person could take hold of. You do. You have a print shop, a staircase, and a younger brother in a wheelchair upstairs. She placed a check on the glass beside her gloved hand and pushed it toward June with 2 fingers. I'm not buying you, she said. I'm paying you for the part of yourself you'll lose if you keep going. Read the number before you get angry. June looked down. She read the amount. It was larger than everything she had earned in 4 years combined. Larger than the debt printed on the final line of the paper with the Leaf logo. Larger than the cost behind the 3rd appointment still left blank on the sheet in her drawer. She looked at it for about 5 seconds. Then she reached for the camera hanging from a hook behind her, removed the lens cap, bent down, and took 1 frame. The check lay on the glass counter, its upper edge curling slightly from having just been pushed across. Beside it was Odette Vale's gloved hand, her fingers not yet fully withdrawn. Odette didn't move. She didn't ask what June was doing either. June lowered the camera, checked the frame, then set the camera on the counter. Do you know why I'm not taking it? She asked. Tell me. Because the photograph I just took is worth more. She pushed the check back, slowly, using exactly 2 fingers the way Odette had pushed it toward her. I sell photographs. I don't sell anything else. And as for the peace in your family, I can't keep it for you. And you can't keep it for him either. Odette Vale looked at her for a very long time. Then she picked up the check, folded it in half, slipped it into her handbag, and put the glove back on her right hand, 1 finger at a time. You sound exactly like my husband, she said. He never took anything people handed him either. She turned toward the door. He died at 59, Miss Halloran. The bell over the glass door rang once, then fell silent. After delivering the final set of photographs on Thursday afternoon, June went home, ate dinner with Tate, then sat quietly at the kitchen table for a long time without knowing what she was supposed to do next. For the past 8 weeks, she'd had a reason to get up at 4:30 in the morning. Starting tomorrow, she wouldn't. She washed the dishes, wiped down the table, and finally stood up, went to the coat hanging behind the door, reached into the pocket, and took out her father's roll of film. It had been sitting there untouched since the night she'd cleaned out the storage room. She carried it into the darkroom and switched on the red light. Film left for 9 years inside a wooden box came with no guarantee that it would still take the chemicals. June knew that. And she also knew that if it had gone bad, she would feel relieved, because then she wouldn't have to decide whether she wanted to look at what was on it. She mixed the chemicals a little warmer than usual. She poured them in, agitated the tank, waited, poured them out. She performed each movement with her hands rather than her eyes, the way she'd been doing for 4 years inside this 32-square-foot room. When she pulled the film from the reel and held it up beneath the red light, she saw that it hadn't been ruined. In fact, it had developed remarkably well. She hung it on the line, clipped it in place, and sat down to wait for it to dry. 36 frames. The first 20 were of the diner, the kitchen, the counter stools, a long-haul truck driver sitting with his head bent over his plate, photographed so clumsily by her father that half the man's head was missing from the frame. There were 3 photographs of June herself at 18, standing beside the coffee machine with a scowl on her face because he'd caught her without warning. June looked at those 3 frames for a long time. From frame 21 onward, everything was dark. Her father had a habit of underexposing photographs, but this wasn't underexposure. These had been taken at night without a flash, from inside the diner looking out, through the window in the back door. June recognized the doorframe immediately. She even recognized the latch in the lower right corner. Frames 21, 22, and 23 were all blurred. Then he managed to find the angle. The final 3 frames were clear. There was a car parked outside, positioned sideways, its front end pointing toward the road. The lights were off. Frame 34 caught the entire rear of the car, including the license plate, and the plate was sharp enough to read every character. Frame 35 was a little wider, showing the trash bin and one corner of the sheet metal roof. Frame 36 had a person in it. A man was standing beside the driver's door, which was open, and he was facing the diner. He wasn't glancing over furtively. He stood upright with his hands in his trouser pockets, staring directly at the building in the way of a man who didn't believe anyone might be looking back at him. The light spilling from the kitchen window was just enough. June brought the strip of film closer to her eyes. then closer still. She recognized him before she even had time to understand whom she was recognizing. His hair had been thicker then, darker, his face leaner. But the way his shoulders sloped was exactly the same, and the slight shift of his weight onto his left leg was exactly the same. And June knew with certainty, because only the week before, she had sat 5 feet across a dinner table from him and listened as he asked her what her father's name was. She didn't cry out. She simply stood there beneath the red light with the strip of film in her hand and realized that her fingers had gone cold, truly cold, the way they did when she took something straight from the freezer. She set the film down in the tray. She sat on the tile floor with her back against the door and tried to think clearly. What came to her were several disconnected facts. Her father had stood at the back door at midnight and photographed a car. He had told her about those cars, and she had told him to lock the door. He had written September 4th on the roll of film, and a man who had sat across from her at dinner the previous week had asked her about that stretch of Highway 17, as though he had never set foot there in his life. She didn't know what those 4 facts became when they were put together. She only knew they had no business existing in the same place. The next morning, June went to the photo shop on Whitaker Street, the one with a film scanner better than hers, and asked them to scan the entire roll at the highest resolution available, print 3 complete sets, and save the files onto 3 memory cards. She paid in cash. She put 1 set in the darkroom drawer, 1 in her camera bag, and left the 3rd sealed inside its envelope. When she stepped out of the shop, she stopped on the sidewalk to straighten the strap of her bag. Across the street, a dark-colored car was parked close to the curb with its windows closed, and it had been there since the night of the dinner with Desmond Fay. June didn't look at it. The email came on Monday afternoon, and June nearly deleted it because the subject line looked exactly like the junk she received every week. The sender was a law office in Savannah she'd never heard of. The message was short and polite, written in the careful language people used when addressing a party who was involved, but not particularly important. It informed her that the transfer proceedings for a parcel, identified by a certain number, located at a specified highway marker along Highway 17, were nearing completion. That according to the records on file, Miss June Halloran was the only surviving heir of the former owner whom they had been able to contact, and that if she raised no objection within 10 business days, the process would proceed as usual. The receiving party was listed on the final line, Vale Coastal. June read the message again from the beginning. She scrolled down to the attachment, opened the case summary, and found the line showing the date the proceedings had been initiated. It was on page 2. She stared at the date, then opened the calendar on her phone and counted backward. 2 weeks ago, which meant 4 days after the night she'd stood on that concrete foundation and told him about the egg timer. She sat perfectly still for about a minute. Then she called him. He answered on the 2nd ring. June, you're buying my father's land. There was a pause on the other end. It wasn't long, only about 2 seconds, but June had sat across from him for 8 weeks, and she knew that during those 2 seconds he wasn't trying to understand what was happening. He was deciding which sentence to say first. Yes, he said. How long have you known how my father died? Another pause. 13 days. June closed her eyes. Say that again. 13 days. You didn't even ask what I meant. I know what you're asking. She stood up from the chair, took 2 steps into the middle of the room, and stopped there. Then tell me. The fire wasn't caused by an electrical fault, he said. The inspection report was falsified. The man who signed it was on my family's payroll. He signed it exactly 22 days after the night my father went down to the dock, and I don't think that's a coincidence. He said it all in one clean sequence, clearly, without stumbling, and it was that clarity that made June feel cold, because it meant he'd arranged these sentences in his head many times already, waiting for some moment when he would finally say them. 13 days, she said. Yes. And during those 13 days, you saw me 6 times. 7. You came to my house. You stood at that table and told me you hoped I'd fill in the appointment form. She could hear that her voice was still normal, and somehow that surprised her. You didn't say anything. No. Then you went and bought that land. Yes, before you told me. Yes. Why? He was silent for a beat. Because that parcel is the last piece in the entire strip that doesn't belong to anyone. If I found out about this, sooner or later someone else would too, and they would try to take it first, so it couldn't remain somewhere the truth could be pulled back out of it. I bought it so it would be under my name and no one else could touch it. I was going to finish handling it first and then... There, June said. He stopped. That's the word. She heard her own voice with startling clarity in the quiet room. Handling. You just said handling. June. I'm not something that needs to be handled, Cormac. She didn't say it loudly. That's my father. Not a parcel in one of your files. Not a loose end that needs to be closed before someone else notices it. That's the man who set an 11-minute timer for me every morning. And you've known what happened to him for 13 days. And in those 13 days you've had dinner with me. You've stood beside me at Tybee and held me up. You've called a hospital in Miami because you found a piece of paper that fell out in the car. I know. You didn't say one word to me. I know. You're not even going to deny it? No, he said. Everything you said is right. And that was the part that hurt. If he had denied it, if he had tried to explain, if he had said anything that could be argued with, she would have had something to push against. He gave her none of that. He simply accepted it, neatly, the way he would accept a number on a balance sheet. And June understood that he would do the same thing again next time. And the time after that, because this wasn't one mistake he'd made. This was the way he functioned. You stood on that warehouse for 30 seconds, she said. And you think you can't forgive yourself because you calculated. You're wrong. You're still calculating. You calculated me. She ended the call. Then she took her coat, told Tate she was going out for a while, and walked down toward the river. She walked for 2 hours in the November wind, all the way along the stone embankment and back again, and she didn't shed a single tear. She got home close to 11 o'clock that night, and instead of going to bed, she pulled out the ladder and brought down every storage box from the top of the cabinet. She had no plan for what she was doing. She simply needed to keep her hands busy. She opened the first box, then the second, and by the fourth, she had begun laying photographs across the living room floor by year, 1 row for each year, left to right, beginning with the autumn 9 years earlier. By 2 o'clock in the morning, there was no longer anywhere to put a foot. Tate rolled out of his room because of the noise, stopped in the doorway, and looked down. What are you doing? I don't know. He didn't ask again. He wheeled himself along the edge of the wall, made a full circuit of the living room, and leaned down to study each row. He looked longer than June expected. There were several photographs he picked up, examined, then put back exactly where they had been. That's a lot, he said. 9 years. You've photographed the whole world by now. He stopped at the final row, the one from this year. Weddings, funerals, kitchens, hallways, that man leaning in the doorway in Brunswick, those herons at Marrowbone. He looked up at his sister. Have you ever been in the frame? June didn't answer. She looked down at the floor, at row after row of photographs, and she began searching. Really searching. She walked along every row, bending down, lifting photographs that overlapped one another. She searched through all 9 years, and there wasn't a single picture of her. Not that there weren't many, there were none. She straightened in the middle of the room and understood, all at once and with painful clarity, that it wasn't an accident. She hadn't accidentally been absent for 9 years. She had built an entire profession around making sure the person being looked at was always someone else. Behind the camera, no one asked you questions. Behind the camera, you could be in the room without having to be in the room. Her father died, and she picked up the camera, and she hadn't put it down since. You should go to bed, Tate said. Yeah, but she didn't go to bed. She sat down among the photographs, and stayed there until dawn began to break. Then she stood, went into the dark room, and took the sealed envelope from the drawer. She sat at the kitchen table with the 3 printed sets in front of her, and thought about calling Cormac. She thought about it for a long time, because if she gave this to him, everything would be dealt with faster, more cleanly, and probably more safely for her. He would know what to do. He had people, lawyers, 30 years of records in the basement. He would take this from her and he would handle it. And that was exactly why she didn't call. She opened her computer, found the address for the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Georgia, and wrote it down on a piece of paper. Then she wrote a letter. She wrote it by hand because she wanted her own handwriting on it. She kept it short. She wrote her father's name, the date he died, the case number from the fire investigation whose report she had requested from the county fire department years earlier and had never read carefully. She wrote that the final 3 frames on the enclosed roll of film had been taken by her father during the week before his death, at the back door of his diner, and that she believed those images had never been included in the case file. She wrote the car's license plate number on a separate line. She didn't write Desmond Faye's name. She considered it for a long time, and ultimately left it out, because she was a photographer, not the person who drew conclusions, and because she wanted what landed on their desk to be what her father had seen, not what she suspected. She signed her name, June Halloran. She included the address of the print shop and her own phone number, hiding nothing. At 7 o'clock in the morning, she went to the post office on Bay Street, sent the envelope by certified mail, kept the receipt stub, and folded it into her wallet. The woman at the counter asked whether there was anything inside that needed a declared value. June looked at the envelope in her hands for about 2 seconds. "No," she said. "Just some old photographs." She walked outside, and for the first time in 4 days, she felt as though she could stand up straight. She told no one. Not Cormac, not Wallace, not even Tate. This belonged to her father, and she was the only person left to do it. 2 days later, June went out to the parking lot behind the print shop close to 7 o'clock in the evening to get the light stand she had left in the trunk. The lot was nothing more than a narrow strip of concrete between 2 rows of buildings, with exactly 4 parking spaces and a single wall light that had been broken since summer. She opened the trunk, and when she looked up, a car pulled in and blocked the exit. Then a second car stopped behind it. Their headlights stayed on. 3 men got out. They didn't move quickly, didn't spread out to either side, didn't do any of the things June had ever seen people do in movies. They simply walked toward her and stopped about 3 steps away, and the man in the middle spoke in the voice of someone carrying out a tedious assignment. "Miss Halloran, the bag." June didn't run. She had been thinking about this moment since the day she stood on the sidewalk on Whitaker Street and saw the dark-colored car parked across the road, and she had understood that if it happened, it would happen in exactly this place, at exactly this hour, and that she wasn't going to win with her legs. "Which bag?" she asked. "The bag you took into the photo shop on Whitaker Street Friday morning." "Oh." She bent down, pulled the camera bag from the trunk, and lifted it. She didn't clutch it to her body. She held the strap in one hand and extended it toward them. "Take it." The man didn't reach for it right away. That was what June had expected, because she knew that when people prepared themselves for something difficult, and it suddenly became easy, they hesitated. "There is film in there, memory cards, printed copies too," she said. "Take all of it, but I'll tell you this now so you don't waste your time." She lowered her hand. "The original left the city 2 days ago. Certified mail, receipt, tracking number, and it isn't anywhere you can reach." The man in the middle looked at her. "You're lying." "Maybe." June shrugged. "But if I'm telling the truth, then what you're standing here demanding is only a copy. And people are going to ask why 3 men had to block off a parking lot to take a copy." She held the bag out again. "Take it, then go tell Mr. Fay he's too late." The name dropped into the middle of the concrete lot, and no one picked it up. The man in the middle didn't move. The other 2 glanced toward him, and in that exact silence, a third set of headlights swept in from the mouth of the alley, washed across all 3 men, then went dark. A car door opened. Wallace got out first and stopped beside the vehicle. Cormac walked around the front of the car and stepped into the concrete lot, unhurried, his hands empty. He didn't look at June. He looked at the man in the middle. "Put it down." The man let go of the bag even though he hadn't actually taken hold of it yet. It hit the concrete with a dry thud. "Go tell him I know." No one said another word. The 3 men turned, got back into their cars, and the 2 vehicles backed away from the exit and drove off. The whole thing lasted less than 2 minutes, and there wasn't a single loud sound. June stood still until she could no longer hear the engines. Then she took 3 steps, leaned her back against the brick wall behind the print shop, and breathed. She exhaled, then drew air in slowly, and realized her hands were still steady, not trembling, and she didn't know whether she should feel relieved by that or afraid of it. Wallace picked up the bag, brushed off the dust, and placed it in the trunk of her car, then stepped away and stood beside his own vehicle. Cormac walked toward her, stopped about 2 steps away, and came no closer. "Are you all right?" "Yes, June. I'm fine." She said it, then looked up. For the past 4 days, she had avoided looking directly at him, and even on the phone she had stared somewhere else while they spoke. Now she looked. She looked straight into his face and kept her eyes there. "How did you know I was here?" "Wallace has been parked at the end of Bull Street since the night before last." He said it plainly, without softening it. "I told him to stay there. You didn't ask me." "No. If you'd asked, I would have told you I didn't need it." "I know." he said. That's why I didn't ask. June looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once. Exactly once. And she didn't say thank you. And he didn't wait for her to. He summoned them on Saturday evening, in the great dining room at Isle of Hope, the room with the long table his father had commissioned before Cormac was even old enough for school, and that, ever since, had been used only for the kinds of things no one ever wanted to use it for. 9 people were present. Desmond Fay arrived 15 minutes early, as he had done out of habit for 30 years, shaking every hand, asking one man about his wife, another about his daughter. Nola Strand arrived last, and sat at the far end without taking off her coat. Cormac waited until everyone was seated. He didn't stand. He simply opened the folder in front of him and took out 3 things, placing them on the table at even intervals in the open space where everyone could see them. The first document, he said. The inspection report from the fire on Highway 17 9 years ago. The conclusion was faulty wiring. The man who signed it remained on this family's payroll for 4 years afterward, under outside technical services. I cut that payment in the 5th year, and no one asked why. He pushed the second sheet slightly forward. The second document. An extract from the expense ledger for September of that year. There is a cash payment with no supporting receipt, approved the same day. The person who authorized it signed with 2 initials. No one spoke. And the third. He laid down the enlargements. 3 photographs printed large, arranged side by side. The first showed only the car parked in darkness. The second was wider, showing the trash bin and a corner of the sheet metal roof. The third showed a man. Desmond Fay was smiling. He bent down to look at the first document and kept smiling. He looked at the second and did the same, even giving a small nod like a man reviewing an old report. Then he turned his eyes to the enlarged photographs, and the smile remained on his face for about another 1.5 seconds. Then it was gone. He didn't turn pale, didn't begin to sweat, didn't drop anything. He simply sat straighter and placed both hands on the table, and in the entire room only Cormac saw the difference, because he had been waiting for it for 2 weeks. Who took these? Fay asked. It doesn't matter. It matters. The man who took them has been dead for 9 years, Cormac said. You know that better than I do. Fay looked at the 3 photographs for a long time. Then he exhaled, and when he spoke, his voice was still the warm voice June had heard across the dinner table. The kind of voice that made people lower their shoulders without realizing it. Your father was going to pull out of dock number 7, he said. He stopped play. You didn't know because you were 25 and he didn't tell you. He was going to give up the entire route and go into respectable hotels. Do you understand what that meant? 400 people out of work in 1 quarter. 3 families in this room losing everything. His eyes moved slowly around the table, stopping on each person. I kept this family alive. As for the diner, I never planned that. The man who owned it was standing at the back door that night, and I knew he was there. It was supposed to be a conversation. The men I sent went too far. You kept yourself alive, Cormac said. My father was just 1 bill, and the man standing at the back door was the 2nd line on that bill. Fay didn't answer. You've sat at this table for 30 years, Cormac said. You remember the names of everyone's wives and children in this room. You even remember the name of the younger brother of a woman you've met once. I used to think that was because you cared. He closed the folder. Now I understand why you remember. Someone midway down the table shifted a chair. Fay placed both hands flat on the wood, looked down at them, then raised his eyes. What are you going to do? Nothing, Cormac said. The room went still. The originals of these 3 photographs left Savannah 4 days ago. I didn't send them. The man standing at that back door had a daughter, and she sent them before I even knew she had them. He pushed back his chair and stood. The evidence was already out of my hands before I sat down in this room. Whether you walk in yourself or wait for them to come find you is no longer my decision. He picked up the folder. There is only one thing I still get to decide, and that is that from tonight on, you no longer have a place at this table. At the far end, Nola Strand stood. She didn't say a word to anyone. She fastened the buttons of her coat, walked behind the row of chairs, and left the room without looking once toward Desmond Fay. The remaining 7 people stayed seated in silence. Fay heard the door close behind him, and he understood that it had all been over before he ever walked into the room. The rain had started Sunday afternoon and still hadn't stopped by evening. June was downstairs in the print shop, halfway through pulling down the rolling door, when someone knocked on the glass. She raised the door again. Cormac was standing outside without an umbrella, his hair wet against his forehead, the shoulders of his coat dark with rain. She stepped back, and he came inside, and the two of them stood there in the dark shop with only the desk lamp at the counter still burning. He didn't take off his coat. He walked to the counter, placed one hand on the glass, and took two things from the inside pocket of his coat. The first was a piece of paper folded into quarters, worn along all four edges, so thin that one of the creases had torn for a short distance. He unfolded it carefully and smoothed it flat with the back of his hand. The second was a new medium-sized print that still carried the smell of fresh paper. He placed it beside the older one. June looked down. The same stretch of marsh, the same 3 dead pine trees leaning to the left, the same band of light crossing the water exactly where it was supposed to cross. The new print was sharp, while the other had faded until almost all its color was gone. But anyone standing there could see that it was the same place, the same hour, and the same person behind the camera. She reached out and touched the old piece of paper, then turned it over. On the back, in her own handwriting from when she was 18, were 7 words. 11 minutes. September 4th. "This is mine," she said. "Yes. Why do you have it?" He looked down at the 2 photographs lying side by side on the glass. "The night my father went down to dock number 7, he said, I didn't go home. I ran out to Highway 17. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept running along the road because the road had lights. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't go any farther, and I sat down on the front step of a diner that was still lit. June didn't move. There was one person inside. Just one. She was 18 years old, and she was wiping down the counter, getting ready to close." He continued in the same steady voice. "She didn't ask my name. She didn't ask why. She took me into the walk-in, cooler and back, gave me a clean towel, and told me to hold it tight against my left hand." He paused. About 20 minutes later, 3 men came into the diner. June placed both hands on the edge of the counter. I heard everything because the cooler was separated from the counter by only a wooden wall. They asked whether anyone had come in, and she answered them immediately, without even half a second of hesitation, that there was no one there. He raised his eyes to hers. "I was lying behind that wall, listening to an 18-year-old girl lie to 3 men in a voice calmer than mine is now." "I don't remember," June said. Her voice was quiet. "I don't remember that. I know. I don't remember your face. I don't remember any of it. All the lights were off. She turned them off before she opened the door for them," he said. "I couldn't see her face either. I only heard her voice." He lifted his left hand and opened it on the glass counter, palm facing upward, the white scar running from near his wrist to the base of his index finger. "Before dawn, she took me out through the back door. When she turned away, this fell out of her coat pocket." He touched one finger to the piece of paper folded into quarters. "I picked it up. I've kept it for 9 years." June looked down at the open hand resting on the glass. She didn't touch it. "For 9 years, I thought I was looking for the person who saved my life," Cormac said. "I wasn't. I was looking for the person who gave me a reason not to become my father." He closed his hand and lowered it. "There are 2 more things. Go ahead. I canceled the land purchase agreement. As of this morning, that parcel is in your name. Every debt attached to it was transferred to me and paid in full." He said it plainly, without lowering his voice or adding a single word to make it easier to hear. "I didn't ask you first, and I know you'll be angry about that, but it was your father's land, and I had no right to keep my name on it for 1 more day. And the second thing? I kept the truth from you for 13 days, he said. I told myself I was keeping it from you so I could handle everything cleanly. I wasn't. I kept it from you because I was afraid." He looked at her. "I was afraid you'd look at me and see only the man who took your father away from you. I was afraid enough to stay silent for 13 days and call that silence protection." He paused. "Fear doesn't turn silence into kindness. You were right. I have nothing to argue with." June stood there for a very long time. Outside, the rain continued beating against the sheet metal roof of the neighboring shop. Then she turned, reached for the camera hanging from the hook behind her, removed the lens cap, and raised it. He didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't adjust his posture, didn't smooth back his hair, didn't look into the lens. He simply stood there, soaked through, his arms hanging at his sides, his eyes resting on the counter where the 2 photographs lay beside each other. June pressed the shutter once. The series on the 9 resorts was purchased by a publishing house in Atlanta in January and printed as a large format book. And they paid June the largest amount of money she had ever received for a single press of the shutter. In February, the photograph of the server leaning against the doorway in Brunswick won a photojournalism award from a Southeastern association whose competition she had entered 3 years in a row and lost all 3 times. The award came with prize money. Put those 2 amounts together, and it was enough. The old debt had already been settled before then, settled in a way it took June an entire week to accept, and she only accepted it after a lawyer explained that the debt had originally been attached to the parcel of land rather than to her name, and that she couldn't repay something that had already been closed. She scheduled the appointment for the end of March. She made the call herself, filled in the 3rd appointment date she had left blank for nearly a year, and paid with her own card at the cashier's desk. The hospital was in Savannah, not Miami. That was her choice. Cormac drove her there. During those 3 months, he never said a single word about money. Not once, even when she told him she was waiting to hear about the award and might lose for a 4th time. He only asked what she planned to do if she lost. She told him she would wait a little longer. He nodded and said all right. Tate went with them that morning, and Wallace drove, and all 3 men remained in the hallway after the door closed behind her. The hallway had 8 blue plastic chairs joined together in one row, a broken vending machine, and a television mounted on the wall playing a weather program with the sound turned off. They sat there for 14 hours. Cormac didn't call anyone. He didn't call the head of the department, didn't call anyone he knew in Miami, didn't ask someone to come down and check on things, didn't question a single nurse about anything except where the restroom was. He turned off his phone the moment he walked in and didn't turn it back on. At noon, Wallace went out and bought sandwiches for the 3 of them. By afternoon, Tate had fallen asleep in his wheelchair, then woke and asked what time it was, and Cormac gave him the time, and Tate went back to sleep. At 9 o'clock that night, Wallace said he was going out to the car to lie down for a while because his back was hurting. Cormac stayed where he was. He sat in the 3rd chair from the door, both elbows resting on his knees, and he did nothing at all. That was what June would think about most afterward. Not that he stayed. It was that during those 14 hours, he didn't arrange a single thing. The man who had spent his entire life calculating everything sat in a hospital hallway and accepted that there was nothing here for him to do except sit. The next morning, they removed the bandages in a room where the lights were kept very low. June sat still and opened her eyes slowly, exactly as they instructed, and for the first few seconds everything was only blurred patches of light and shadow running into one another. Then the shapes gradually sharpened. They asked her what she could see. She said she could see her own hand resting on her lap, could see every line in it, could even see the small scratch across the knuckle of her index finger that she'd gotten climbing the fence at Marrowbone nearly a year earlier and had thought was completely healed. They told her that was very good. By mid-morning, they allowed her into the hallway. The door opened, and June stepped out, and the first thing she saw clearly and completely beyond that room was Cormac Vale asleep in the 3rd plastic chair from the door, his head fallen sharply to one side, one hand still resting on his knee, his coat draped over the chair beside him instead of over his body. Tate was sitting 2 chairs away, holding his phone, and he looked up at his sister. He started to wake Cormac. June raised a hand to stop him. She stood there looking at Cormac for about half a minute. She could see everything. She could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the white scar in his left palm where his hand lay open on his knee, even a loose thread at the cuff of his shirt that no one had probably told him about yet. Then she turned toward the small table against the wall, where Tate had left their things, and reached for the camera resting there. 1 year later, June opened her first exhibition in an old warehouse in Savannah's Port District, a warehouse Vail Coastal had left vacant for many years and that had now become a tuition-free vocational workshop, open to people who had just stepped out of lives that had given them nowhere to go next. During the day, people learned welding there, learned electrical work, learned how to bake. On that Friday evening, the chairs were pushed to one side and photographs were hung on the brick walls. 42 images. One showed a server leaning against a doorway after 9 hours of work. Another showed a check lying beside a gloved hand on a glass counter, with no caption beneath it. 3 were large enlargements from an old roll of film, whose photographer had died 9 years earlier, and beneath them, June wrote only one line, his name and the date he had taken them. The photograph hanging in the center of the main room wasn't a landscape. It was a man standing inside a dark print shop, soaking wet, both arms hanging at his sides, not posing, not looking into the lens, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the frame. The title written on the small card beside it was 11 Minutes. People who came to see the exhibition asked why she had named it that, and June only said it was the name her father had given to a span of time, and she explained nothing more. Wallace stood near the door all evening and refused to sit down. Tate held the list and wrote down the names of the buyers. Odette Vale arrived late, walked once around the room, lingered longest in front of the photograph with the check, and before leaving, she said only one thing to June, that she had once told her she was beautiful, in the kind of way people photographed once, and then moved on, and she had been wrong. 3 weeks later, on the morning of September 4th, Cormac woke June at 4:30 and told her to bring her camera. He drove her down Highway 17 and stopped at the empty lot with the concrete foundation. The grass had been cleared. In the corner, beside the old water pipe, there was a small wooden sign bearing the name of the diner that had once stood there and the name of the man who had opened it. June stood looking at that sign for a long time. Then he handed her a plastic kitchen timer, the kind you turned by hand, the kind people used when boiling eggs. She took it and saw that it had already been set to 11. He lowered himself onto one knee on the concrete. "I'm not good at things like this," he said, "so I'm only going to say what I know for certain. 9 years ago, you gave me a reason not to become the person I would have become, and you gave it to me on a night when you didn't even know who you were giving it to. I want to spend the rest of my life repaying that, not with money, but by staying." In the east, the sky was beginning to brighten, and the light her father had once measured with a kitchen timer began to run. June set the timer down on the concrete. She said yes while it was still ticking, and they stood there holding each other until the bell rang, and neither of them took a single photograph, because there are moments when all a person needs to do is stand inside them. There are people who spend their entire lives behind a lens because they are afraid of being seen, and there are people who spend their entire lives managing their pain because they are afraid to truly feel it. But kindness given away on a night when no one is there to witness it never disappears. It only travels a very long way around before returning at the exact moment we need it most. And the most beautiful part of a human life, just like the most beautiful part of a photograph, is always the part no one had time to arrange. If June and Cormac's story touched your heart, please leave a like and share this video with someone you think may need to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that every day there will be more warm and heartfelt stories waiting for you. How did this story make you feel? Was there any part that reminded you of someone in your own life? Please leave a comment below. We truly hope to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.